I think we had an excellent morning session. The three speakers covered their topics, were very thought-provoking and encouraged a great raft of questions. And I trust that this afternoon will be no different. So my job is Ian McCluggage. I'm Vice Chair of Trustees, and it's my job to chair the afternoon session here with our two speakers. Our first speaker up will be Claire Beckett, and Claire probably needs little introduction to dairy farming audience in Northern Ireland. Claire farms in partnership with her parents, managing a high-performing dairy herd of 150 Holstein Friesian cows at Donacloney, and also works as dairy commercial nutritionist with Trow. The farm and herd over the years have won several awards, and Claire's presentation will provide you, the audience, with an insight as to how the farm achieves the results that it does. It'll be clear when Claire speaks that attention to detail isn't something, it's second nature to Claire. It's not something you go looking for. And the quality of the results that you'll see from the herd is testimony to all the work and effort that is put in. So, Claire, can I ask you to address our conference, and over to yourself. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Afternoon, everyone. As Ian said, I worked for Trow Nutrition for about 5 years, full-time following graduation. I'd done a degree in agriculture. The long-term goal was always to come home and milk cows, but I wanted to get something behind me. So 5 years with Trow full-time, got hard to balance the farm and nutrition full-time, so I want to keep my foot in the door. So I've kept this last 3 years just working for them part-time, 2 days a week. It keeps me progressive. I'm always bringing stuff home to apply on the farm. So a quick bit of background on the farm. I'm farming in partnership with my mum and dad. We run a herd of 150 Holstein cows. We are calving September till February. A few years ago, we have been calving through till May time, so September to May. And just in recent years, we've just chopped off a month of the calving pattern every year. The goal is to get September to December. I like a block calving system. It's just personal preference, to be honest. I like the streamliness of it. This year, we're finishing up breeding here at the end of this month. So we're going to be next year calving September to January. We'll hopefully take another month off, so 2 years from now will be hopefully September to December. In terms of 12-month rolling average, we're currently doing 10,900 litres at a butterfat of 4.3 and a protein of 3.35. Honestly, I would have liked to say it was at 11,000 litres. That was the goal. Why we're not there? Two things, realistically. We are a grazing herd still. We had a difficult grazing season last year, as well as many people did. The other thing we got hit with last year was Q fever, so we're probably slightly behind where we should have been. If I get April and May past this year, hopefully we'll be back on track with a 12-month rolling average till 11,000 litres. We're twice day milking through a conventional 12-point swing over parlour. As I said, we're grazing. Usually late April is when we start to go to grass. I batch cows, it's not everything goes to grass. And we'll be grazing usually through to some stage in October. But I'll chat about grazing later on. We're working on two full-time labour units. So I class my dad as a full-time labour unit. Myself as about 3/4 of a labour unit. I'm working out part-time. I have 2 young kids in the picture. So I'm 3/4 of a labour unit. Then we have my mum helping us out and relief milkers that make up about another 1/4 of a labour unit. So the farm's run with 2 full-time labour units, realistically. We rear all our own replacements, so we're aiming usually for about 35 replacements on the ground. That works out a replacement rate of about 23%. By no fault of TB, we lost 9 replacements there, so we had 27 replacements to breed from this year. We worked hard. We're close to finished breeding here. We scanned yesterday, and we're well on track to get the same number of pregnancies that we needed to hold herd numbers. So through no fault of TB, we're heading probably towards a replacement rate of 20%. So obviously TB has helped us out. In this case, we didn't need those replacements, so 27 replacements for a herd of 150 cows. We're farming 210 acres, predominantly grassland, with 25 acres of maize silage in and 25 acres of winter cereals. Those winter cereals, we feed the grain back to the cows, usually 2.5 to 3 kilos of grain, or usually wheat or barley, depending on the year. That goes back into the milkers, and then the straw, wheat or barley, depending on what it is, bedding on feeding the farm. So, to set the scene for the rest of the presentation, I want to look at KPIs first. I'm not going to spend too long on this here, but I want to set the scene for the rest of the presentation. These are the ones I would say are most linked to profitability. There's a lot of KPIs you can look at in terms of dairy cows, but the ones that are directly linked to profitability and that you should keep at the forefront of your business plan, income over feed costs. So income over feed costs is your total feed costs. So all the costs behind your forage making, contractor, reseeding costs, etc. behind that. I have a number of tables in this presentation. I'll have a target on where the farm is. That target is personal to me. It's the target I've set my farm. It'll not be far away from industry targets, but it is personal to me. So income over feed costs, in my head, if you're making over £9 per cow, you're making good money. Currently, things are good at the minute. We're post-peak, we're about 180, 190 days in milk. Feed costs, or income over feed, we're making £10.33. That's with the winter bonus off for this month. So £10.33. So we're well on track at the moment. Next one, percentage of heifers calving between 23 and 25 months. At 90% of mature body weight, and that there's the important factor. They have to be at 90% of mature body weight. People will chat on age or average age of first calving. That's probably okay for an all-year-round calving system. Once you go block calving, where I'm heading towards, I can't calve my heifers in before 24 months. All my heifer calves, all my replacement calves are on the ground month September, and I can't bring them into the herd until September 2 years ago, or 2 years' time. So it's a percentage between 23 and 25 months, and they have to be 90% mature body weight. So the target I've set myself is 90%. We're currently sitting at 90 or 93%. Getting the body weight's no issue. We just had a couple of heifers that ran on and took a few more services to get them in calf. Replacement rate, as I said, we're sitting currently at 23. We're heading towards a target of 20% for next year. Years in production, with our current replacement rate for this year of 23%, cows on average are lasting 4.5 or 4.4 lactations. Where we're heading, they're 20% replacement rate. Cows on average then will be lasting 5 lactations. Lifetime production, currently sitting at 48,000 litres. I want to get that to over 50,000 litres, purely by getting cows lasting longer and getting back to 11,000 litres. Lifetime daily yield, gaining a lot more traction, people are chatting a lot more about it. Lifetime daily yield is a fantastic KPI. It pulls together a lot of the above ones. Lifetime daily yield is the total milk production divided by all the days that animal's on the ground, from birth through till she leaves the farm. So it takes account of age of first calving, how many lactations she's lasting, her total milk production, her calving index. It's all summarised into one KPI. We want to get that there above 20 litres. We're currently sitting at 20.5 litres. So we're on track. We'll probably push the target up again, so well. But if you did nothing more than calculate your income over feed costs and your lifetime daily yield, if it's above 9 and above 20 litres, respectively, you probably run the sustainable business. Those KPIs can be linked to any farming system. So that's just to set the scene for the rest of the presentation. So the rest of it, oh, forgot about this, the environmental side. I don't get too hung up on the environmental side of things, but if we focus on lifetime daily yield, getting cows lasting longer, producing more milk, calving index, age of first calving, etc., we will inevitably be reducing our carbon footprint. So it's a direct correlation between the two. So with those KPIs in mind, how do I go about achieving those KPIs through nutrition? There's 4 main pillars I set that I focus on the home farm and with the customers I'll be working with. One of the pillars I've had to move, just purely I haven't got time to go through it, but the 4th pillar would have been calf and heifer rearing, which is a massive focus point on the home farm, trying to get those calves well grown and calving in at 23, 25 months. But the topics I'm going to cover today, transition cow, is probably my biggest win and my favourite topic. And Connor, I think, started the conversation on the importance of that transition cow. Second point, optimising lactation performance. So if we get that transition right, cows hit the ground running. How do we keep the throttle ladder? And then third point, health and fertility. So first point then, transition cows. So this is probably, I always talk about this is nearly the biggest win. It's quite simple to get it right. So your transition cow, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with the transition cow if she doesn't go right. Milk fever, hail cleanings, metritis, ketosis, fatty liver, you name it. There's a lot of things that can go wrong if we don't get that transition cow right. The one I've circled in red, milk fever. Milk fever I consider is like the gateway disease. If you let a cow get milk fever, she's more than likely to get a lot of those other things. You get milk fever, hail cleanings, metritis, reduced dry matter intake, the list goes on. So if we focus our attention on controlling milk fever, inevitably we will control the other things. But a proper transition diet should focus on getting all those things down to negligible levels. Go back one step, we do selective dry cow therapy, have done this donkey's years. Probably about 70% of cows receive sealant only. We do put a lot of focus on getting the leaders down prior to drying off to allow us to work with selective dry cow therapy. We separate the cows coming up to drying off. They're on the dry cow silage and they'll remain on that and continue to be milked until the leaders go below 10 litres. Once they're milked and they do less than 10 litres, then they'll be dried off. That could be 24 hours or it could be 3-4 days, whatever it takes. So back to the transition diet. So dry period is 60 days for us. We work two groups, far off and close up. So the far off is the first 30 days, close up the last 30 days. Some people will work a one group system. I personally don't mind what it is as long as the cows are fed right. We have a lot of cows calve in September and October. I have the opportunity to group them and I can graze those far off and save a wee bit of money. It doesn't suit everyone. One group system has its benefits too in terms of that there's less group changes and it's actually easier to get the nutrition right when they're managed as one group. But we're doing a far off 30 days and a close up 30 days. So the far off period, there's two focus areas, two things to get right. Sounds simple, but it's actually, sometimes it can easily go wrong on farms. Controlled energy and rumen fill are the two things. Controlled energy, a dry cow doesn't need much energy, and we often, nearly every farm is probably overfeeding energy to cows or to dry cows. These 2 points stand the whole way through the dry period, so far off and close up, but just focusing on the far off stage. She needs about 90 to 100 megajoules. That's not much. The only way to offer that there and control that is if she's grazing, she should be on standing hay. If I'm working standing hay, that standing hay is starting to be grown. Take first cut off it and you have to set a block of ground to one side after first cut. So say I need it July and August, mainly, so it's usually a block of ground set aside after first cut. It's stand hay, it's ropey stuff. Either that or proper dry cow silage, stemmy, mature dry cow bales, either fed in the house or sometimes I've had a stubble field and two feed carts with bale silage in it. Either or, they should be in mature silage. Some guys will be grazing cows on average sort of grazing, but holding them tight. The problem with holding them tight is my next point, rumen fill. If you don't, the only grazing that works is standing hay. If you're grazing and holding them tight, then you may be controlling energy, but you're going to hit rumen fill. We want to keep cows' stomachs bulging to make sure they maintain rumen fill so that they calve down with a good appetite. These 2 points, so the reason why we do controlled energy, if you overfeed a dry cow, she will reduce her dry matter intake at the point of calving. So it's all about keeping dry matter intake on calving cows down with big appetites. Don't overfeed them energy and keep the rumen expanded. So that's the only two things you really need to focus on the far off dry cows. Coming into the close-up period, so cows have to come into the house for this stage, and you can't do this outside. This is for the last 30 days, at least the last 28 days. The 3 focus points here: the same 2, controlled energy, slightly more energy, but not much. So we're chatting 110, 130 megajoules. Maintaining rumen fill. So the whole dry period, the cow should be sitting bulging. You should never see the V shape if you look at the rumen of the cow. It should always be sitting bulging. So maintaining controlled energy and rumen fill. The other thing to think of in the close-up period is the prevention of milk fever. Now, there's a number of strategies out there. You'll have calcium binders, you'll have low calcium diets. The one I've grown to love and would put most faith behind is DCAD, so dietary cation balance. Very simply, looking at the scales, it's a balance of your cations, so that's your positive, that's your salt and your potassium, keeping them low in the diet and offset them with chlorine and sulfur. Realistically, we don't have very much control over the sodium in the diet. It is what it is, but we do have a big control over the potassium in the diet. Your potassium's coming mainly from your silage. If you were to feed your milking cow silage that's been heavily slurried, it's going to be rank with potassium. It's pure poison for a dry cow. So we want to make low potassium dry cow silage, which I'll chat on here shortly. So that's how we control it and keep the potassium as low as possible. And then we offset it with mainly chlorine we use instead of sulfur, and that's where your chloride flakes come in. But in terms of balancing them, the reason why we're doing that, DCAD is about acidifying the blood. A cow has a big requirement for calcium around the point of calving. She does have a lot of calcium in her body, locked up in her bones, and we have to give the cow access to the calcium in her bones. And we do that by partially acidifying the blood. DCAD is an exact science. It's not a matter of just keeping the potassium as low and throwing as much chlorine at the cow as possible. It has to be done in a controlled manner. You don't want to go too far one way or the other. And what we do, so we're acidifying the blood, but we can't measure blood pH that readily. So what we do on farm is we check urine pH. So urine pH will be reflective of blood pH. So simple, balance the diet on paper. And then after 3 days, you can go and check the urine pH. So it's a simple wee pH strip, stimulate the cow to pee, put it in midstream, wait 15 seconds, and then read off the gauge. DCAD, there's different boundaries. There's what we call partial DCAD and full DCAD. DCAD's measured in NEQ per kilogram of dry matter. We want to get it negative. The more negative we go depends sort of on the production of the cow. Though that sort of 8,000 litre, I'm usually happy enough on a partial DCAD. That 10, 12, 11,000 litre cow probably needs to go closer to a full DCAD. So purely because she's a bigger calcium demand at the point of calving. So a normal cow that's not acidified, if you want to do your milking cow, pH should probably sit about 8. On partial DCAD, we're sitting about 6.8 to 7.5. Full DCAD is where I want to go with the cows at home, and that's a pH of 5.9 to 6.8. Usually my cows end up about 6.5. In terms of making dry cow silage, so this is the backbone of the diet, and unless I get this right, I can't make the dry cow diet work realistically. We're aiming for very mature silage, well grown out. It's usually on a separate block of ground, starting on something with a low potash index, so ideally identifying ground that has an index of 1 or 2, and growing that crop out stemmy, so I'll not be cutting that there probably to the start of June, maybe even the second week of June, to be honest. No slurry, just straight nitrogen, no potassium applied at all, usually about 2.5 to 3 bags of nitrogen. You can take 1 cut off this here or 2 cuts off it. 2 cuts is tight, but it can be done. In terms of quantity of silage needs for the dry cow period, usually rough rule of thumb, 1 bale per cow. That's silage probably high 30 dry matter, about 700 kilo in a bale. 1 bale per cow for the close-up period. If you're feeding that silage to the far off, then 2 bales per cow for the full dry period. So that sort of stuff is easier made in bales than clamp silage, but either or, it's usually just for convenience and handiness of feeding, I always go for usually bales. In terms of how it analyses, you might not be able to read that, but in terms of protein, it's usually about 7-8% crude protein that silage ends up with. So we end up having to replace a lot of the protein in the diet, in the pre-calver. In terms of energy, though, that silage usually ends up somewhere between 9.5 10 ME. The one thing that even I go wrong with, you usually make it too dry. That standing hay that you're cutting, it's nearly standing dry as it is. You could knock that off, mow it at 11 o'clock in the day, give it a kick out if you want. If not, it doesn't really matter. And bale it up that evening, and it'll probably still be mid-30s. Ideally, you wouldn't wilt that for any more than 24 hours anyway. You still want that silage to be about 30% dry matter, otherwise the mix ends up far too dry. In some cases, I do end up adding a fair chunk of water back into the mix, but adding water can come up with its problems itself. In terms of the mineral side, the important part of it, potassium level less than 1.5 and a DCAD of less than 180, ideally 150. So it's important to have that there mineral analysis in order to calculate the DCAD on paper. In terms of what the dry cow diet ends up looking like, this is for a full DCAD. Partial DCAD will be something similar, but full DCAD, we're chatting 3 or 4 kilo of chopped straw, and it's stressed that it's pre-chopped straw. So it's chopped prior to going in the diet feeder, sort of as short as you can, at least 2 inches at the very most. Ideally wheat over barley. Wheat, one, will chop better, it's a wee bit coarser, a bit more scratch factor, and usually lower in DCAD. So 3 to 4 kilo of chopped straw. Your dry cow silage then obviously depend on dry matter, but usually 20-25 kilo of dry cow silage. Your pre-calver blend is usually 3 or 4 kilo of pre-calver. My pre-calver blend that I made ended up about 28% crude protein, so it is a high protein blend. We have made, all the forage fraction is very, very low energy, low protein, so we end up having to replace a lot of the protein here. What it's made up of, soya, protected soya. I'm a big fan of protected soya. What we're trying to do in that dry period is build up protein reserves, but also increase colostrum quality, etc. So it's soya, protected soya, and rape. Then your cereal sources, maize and wheat, and I just usually balance that depending on what the milkers are getting. But all I want my pre-calver to deliver in terms of is a high quantity of protein and a high quantity of starch. I don't need any more additional fibre, etc. A good mineral pack, and then ammonium chloride. So ammonium chloride is my first anionic salt I usually go with, and it's usually at a base level of about 50 grams in the pre-calver. That gives me my first initial jag of anionic salts. I then balance the remainder of the diet on farm with my chloride flakes, and it's balanced according to the silage analysis. So it'll be somewhere, usually for most farms, it'll be somewhere between 100 to 250 grams of my chloride. I think it worked out about 150 to 170 for most of the winter there for myself. In terms of the fancies in the dry cow diet, where it starts getting expensive, I have yeast in there. Everyone understands the role of yeast. Toxin binder, I always keep a toxin binder in the full lactation, dry period on lactating cows at a low to moderate rate. It's in there as an insurance policy. Protected choline, I've probably used protected choline this last 3 years. What is in there for? We're feeding this metabolic athlete. We're expecting her to calve in and milk very quickly, and she will inevitably lose a bit of condition. And that wee bit of condition is not to be feared, as long as we control it. So she's going to lose a bit of condition. There is that risk of fatty liver in there. What the choline is doing is helping that liver process that fat and prevent fatty liver. Expensive, but it really does work. Protected methionine is the other thing I have in there. I have it in the lactating diet. It's in the lactating diet because I'm balancing to amino acids now. So it's important to keep it sort of through the whole through the whole year. But there's a lot of research. Protected methionine drives dry matter intakes and milk yield, etc. post-calving. So you can look. The backbone is your soya or rape, your good mineral pack, and your ammonium chloride. The fancies is farm dependent, but those are the ones that I've grown to trust over the years. In terms of how it analyzes, crude protein wise, it usually ends up somewhere between 13 to 15% crude protein. What I'm really aiming for is the metabolizable protein. That's what the cow really requires. To build protein reserves and for colostrum quality, you really need to be hitting 1,200 grams of MP in the diet. In terms of DCAD, minus, you want to go in the minus, somewhere between If partial decal would be about -50, full decal you're going less than 100, somewhere between -100 and -150. We're just hitting probably just shy of full decal there at -90. Intake-wise, look, they'll be eating greater than 12 kilo of dry matter. The cows there, most of the winter, were eating about 13.5. That there probably doesn't sound like a very palatable mix, very stemmy silage and a lot of chopped straw, but it is actually a very palatable mix. And cows do eat it very readily. Energy-wise, 120, 130 megajoules for my type of cow. We're just slightly over at 134. Even with that real stemmy silage and straw, it's still hard to control. They're still probably getting a wee bit too much energy, but it's not far away. Starch-wise, I try to get as much starch in there, and that's why I'm working with maize and wheat in there. You want to try to get that starch as high or as close as you can to the milkers. Now, my milker's diet will probably be sitting about 18 starch. If you got it between 5 and 6% of what your milker's diet is, just to help transition them. So it's sitting 10% there. Most of my cows will calve in September and October. At that stage of the year, I don't have maize silage in the diet. Maize silage will only be coming into play in November when I have a lot of cows in the ground. Once the maize silage is in the milker's diet, I will put, it's usually about 12 kilo into the milker's diet. I'll usually go and put about 5 or 6 kilo into the dry cow diet, purely to help transition them onto the starch levels. The maize silage delivers too much energy, so I don't really want to feed too much of it, but it's just to get that starch level up to where it needs to be. At the point of calving, so cows, they're in cubicles, they're moved into group pen, straw bedded, for ideally 3 to 4 days prior to calving. They calve down there in the group pen. The next 4 points I want happening ASAP at the point of calving. When she's pushing that calf out at the end, I want to go away, mix the revive up so that the revive is there as soon as she's back on her feet. She gets a chance to drink the revive and lick the calf. She's got about 10 minutes to do that. Meanwhile, I go set individual calving pen up for her, headlock and gate, on a barrel of milk and cow silage at the other side of the calving gate. Back to her within 10 minutes, ideally. Take the calf goes to the calf house, and the cow goes to the individual calving pen. That's what I call sort of snatch calving. She gets enough time just to lick the calf roughly, and then they're separated. So she's straight into the individual calving pen, held in the headlock and gate. Her nose is in a bar full of silage, and I get the portable milker on her. The quicker you can do that, yes, it's a benefit for the calf. You get higher colostrum quality, but also that cow's more likely to drop her colostrum. So I want those 4 things happening as quick as possible. She's a high requirement for calcium, and she's a high requirement for energy. The quicker we can get her transition from that dry cow diet onto the milker's diet after calving, the better. The revive is in there as an insurance policy. We've done everything we can to get her accessing the calcium from her bones. The revive is in there just as your insurance policy. That's the only form of additional calcium we give at the point of calving. They'll remain in the calving pen for anywhere between 12 hours to 3 days. September, October, they might even get 12 hours. If she is down that barrel of silage, she's clean, she's got her reviva. The last point of check I'll do is I'll check her rumination. So we are working with SenseFib collars. We're measuring heat with them on rumination. From I started measuring rumination is probably one thing I couldn't live without now. Provided her rumination is good, it hasn't dropped, so usually they'll sell about 600. If a cow transitions right, she shouldn't go any less than 400. If she doesn't go any less than 400, she's heading back up towards 600. She's good to go into the lactating group. So I've looked at the rumination graph, and she's back in the milkers group. Provided the milkers group isn't overstocked, I don't usually like to go anywhere more than 95% occupancy in terms of cubicle numbers. So you can shift cows into that milkers group quickly, provided the milkers group isn't overstocked. So just to wrap up the transition pillar, how do you measure transition success? Firstly, obviously, metabolic issues at the point of calving. So the table here, these are clinical cases. There's subclinical cases is another issue. If we take milk fever to start with, if you have one downer cow, proper clinical milk fever, you're more than likely to have about 6 subclinical cases. That's what the representation is at the top. So one cow down, there's probably about 6 under the radar that you're not aware of with subclinical milk fever. So looking at clinical cases, target for milk fever is less than 2%. We're currently less than 1%. Retained cleaning, less than 6% is a target. We're sitting at 3%. Metritis, less than 5%. We're sitting at 3%. Ketosis, 1%. And DA is negligible. We don't have DAs anymore. So that's metabolic issues. In terms of fertility, I'll chat on later on, but fertility will improve massively if you get that transition diet right. 3 21-day pre-breed checks. I am a big fan of 21-day pre-breed scanning. So scan the cow 21 days after calving. 1, you're checking she's clean, she's not cystic or anything, and that she's cycled. Ideally, if you're presenting the cow to the scanner man at 21 days, she should be clean, and realistically, I would like her to have a heat as well. If she doesn't, then get her cleaned up and get her cycling. But your 21-day pre-breed check will be probably one of the first things to identify any subclinical issues. If you are seeing slightly dirty calf beds, or cows not recovering properly, or getting cycling, or cystic cows, more than likely you need to go do something with a transition diet. And lastly, days to peak. When I started nutrition, probably the thinking was ideally would slow that cow up post-calving to let her dry matter intake catch up, hold the protein back or something. But realistically, if you get that transition diet right, that cow is going to hit the ground running. She's going to milk, and she's going to milk fast. You can't put the brakes on her. It's just we're going to have to get a very good diet into her post-calving to keep up with her. So that leads me into optimising lactation performance. So we've got the transition diet right. Cows hit the ground running. How do we keep the toe in her now? I think everyone will agree there's no substitute for good grass silage. If you have moderate quality silage, no matter how much concentrate you throw at her, you're not going to do as good a job as you will with good quality silage and good concentrate. Everything going into that cow has to be energy dense. We make 4 cuts. We used to make 5 cuts. I never really needed the 5th cut. The 5th cut ended up bales, and those bales ended up sitting about. Plus, the 5th cut ended up September, and I just want to focus on calving cows in September and October. So there's no point making 5th cut if I didn't need it, and I hadn't the time to make it. So after 4th cut with slurry, everything, and just whatever grows on the slurry. Young stock will graze it, and then my husband brings on all his ewes then, September and October, and that manages grass throughout the winter time. Sheep go off at the start of January. Ground's allowed to recover in January, and then hit it with slurry in the start of February. It just means with starting from soil, basically in January, it's grazed out tight. First cut usually ends up into May. We rarely are cutting in April. It's usually somewhere between the 1st and the 4th of May. Ideally then cutting every 5 weeks after. So second cut was 5 weeks after exactly, and 3 weeks, or 3rd cut was 5 weeks after. 4th cut, I purposely let go on a wee bit more. One, because I didn't need a 5th cut, I didn't want to cut too early, but also wanted to get a wee bit higher dry matter. First cut tends to end up 25-26% dry matter. I worked a 24-hour wilt. There's a trade-off between getting dry matter. You could leave it to wilt a wee bit longer, but you'll lose the nutritional value of it. So I more important with the nutritional value. So 24-hour wilt. At that time of year, it's hard to get much more than 25-26% dry matter, and that's with tedding once or twice. So when I'm feeding the silages back, I usually try to balance them in terms of dry matter. First cut and 4th cut's usually fed together. Now, the milkers will get predominantly 1st cut, but there'll be a wee bit of 4th cut in there just to bring the dry matter of the mix up. The 2nd and 3rd, it's usually easier to get closer to 30% dry matter. They're usually clamped together, 2nd and 3rd. So 1st and 4th and 2nd and 3rd. In terms of the maize, last year probably wasn't the best year for maize. It wasn't bad either. It ended up just shy of 30% dry matter and 28 starch. The year previous, that could have been 36% dry matter, 36% starch. But just maize didn't get the maturity it needed to. But nonetheless, a lot of that maize silage that was made last year that hit that 28% starch, cows milked equally as well on it. In terms of the current diet, as it stands today, cows are eating 34 kilo of silage, 12 kilo of maize silage, 10 kilo of blend in the wagon, and then feed yield in the parlour, with average feed going through the parlour of 4 kilo. So 14 kilo of concentrate there in total on average. In terms of dry matter intake, that's 25 kilo of dry matter. So we're slightly past peak. We're 180, 190 days of milk, I think. Cows are back a wee bit. We're averaging 38.5 litres at 4.3 butterfat, 3.36 protein. So total feed costs, what's that, £6.42. Milk price with the bonus off, I've done it on at 43.5p. So milk sales, £16.75. So our income over feed cost there of £10.33. What the concentrate side of things looks like, that's the blend nut combined at 14 kilo. I've highlighted a couple of things in red. Sopperlin, same as the dry period. When I'm balancing protein, I usually try to keep the overall crude protein of the diet low. I'm chatting low 16s. I'm not formulating crude protein, but I'm always keeping it in the back of my head. We're trying to balance the protein in terms of rumen degradable protein and bypass protein. With good quality grass silage, that will deliver a fair chunk of the rumen degradable protein you need. So your concentrate, all it needs to do is deliver a small amount of bypass protein. And that's why I have heavily reliant on protected soya. It's just you're protecting soya and making it more bypass. The other thing in there, max fat. Any high-yielding diet I tend to put in fat, somewhere 300, 500 grams of fat. It's purely to increase the energy density of that diet. Protected methionine, so I say we're formulating the protein in terms of rumen degradable protein and bypass protein, metabolizable protein, etc. But we're taking it a step further. We're now balancing to amino acids. So a cow hasn't a requirement for actual protein per se. She has a requirement for amino acids, which is the building blocks of protein. And there's certain amino acids in the diet that'll be more limiting than others. The two main ones that are limiting in diets over here is lysine and methionine. Methionine more so than lysine. Most diets, including my own, is usually about 8 to 10 grams short of methionine. I'm supplementing 15 gram of product to deliver that 9 gram of methionine. So it's precision in terms of how we feed cows in terms of protein. I've yeast in there, toxin binders I mentioned in there as an insurance policy, the full lactation. In terms of how it analyses, so the dry matter, ideally I want that somewhere 40, 45%. So that's why I'm balancing the forages. If on a year that we end up with very dry forages, I will add water to the diet feeder, compact feeding or whatever you want to call it. So I'm always trying to keep the dry matter right. Dry matter intake, usually they peak out about 25.5 kilo of dry matter. I usually try to keep a forage to concentrate ratio, provided the silage is good that year, of about 50-50. So at the minute they're eating 12.8 kilo of forage. Energy density is a big thing. We need at least 12 megajoules plus. We're currently sitting at 12.4. Crude protein, say we're trying to aim for low crude protein from an environmental point, but there is going to be a big drive in the industry to go that way. Most of my diets that I've run over the winter time are somewhere between 15.8 and 16.5. Realistically, my forages alone, my grass silage is sitting 16-70% crude protein. So inevitably, I probably will, overall diet's going to end up there anyway, with the forage fraction on its own. So I'll not get too much more into that, but we're formulating nowadays for 20 to 30 different parameters. That's just about 10 of them. Grazing criteria, so I'm not going to get too tied up here in terms of grazing, but there is cows go to grass. I end up with 3 groups, a full-time grazing group, a group out by day and in by night, and a group house full-time. Those that are, it's 3 groups, but it's managed as 2. So the ones that go out by day and stay in at night, ones that go out by day go out with the lows, and when they come in at night, they go in with the highs. So it's the management of 2, but they have to be PD status plus the right body condition score, and you can see the litres under each criteria I try to aim for. So less than 32 litres goes to grass full time, less than 38 is out by day and in by night, and anything over 38 litres is in the house. That's all I'm going to say on the grazing. Lastly, last couple of slides, herd health and fertility. Quickly, herd health. Lameness, we are routine trimming at drying off and again at 90 to 100 days. Ideally, you'd do a trim every 4,000 litres So if you're an 8,000 litre herd, 2 trims. If you're a 12,000 litre herd, you probably need to be getting that 3rd trim in. So we're heading towards needing that probably 3rd trim. We've got leaving us down to a very good level, but there's still room for improvement in there. In terms of vaccinations, we're sort of vaccinating for everything. I'll keep going here. Fertility, we're sex semening for the month of December. Thereafter is all beef, Angus and blue. We're only in the genomics probably 2 years. First lactation animals and second lactation animals we've genomic data for, so we work on that there. Anything above that there, we're still looking at the animal, how she looks, her milk recording, any history of mastitis, fertility, lameness, etc. So it ends up about 80% of cows in the month of December are eligible for sex semen. As I say, we do a pre-breed scan at 21 days just to make sure everything's running as it should be, so that when we get to the end of our voluntary waiting period, I know our cows are cycling right. We're scanning every 2 weeks, so that just makes sure cows aren't slipping through the system empty. You're always keeping on top of it if you're scanning regularly. Voluntary waiting period of 40 days, and I do use but I do use OV and seeders to keep on top of those silent cows. There is still silent cows in there, and it's just keeping on top of them with OVs and seeders. Conception rate to them, look, it's an extra cost, but as long as you're getting the conception, it's paying for itself. In terms of fertility KPIs, so percentage of herd pregnant by 130 days. The target's greater than 90. We're sitting currently at 92%. Services per conception. My target's 1.75. We're currently sitting 1.7. Calvin to conception interval 85. We're currently sitting 87. Our Calvin interval ideally would be Calvin every year, so 365. We're currently sitting at 367. Conception rate greater than 60 ideally. We're just sitting at 59, and an empty rate of 5%. So all those fertility KPIs, I put it down to getting the transition date right, and not regular scanning, just keeping on top of it. A few take-home messages. Firstly, focus on the KPIs that drive profitability. In my mind, that's income over feed costs and lifetime daily yield. Your dry cow data is your biggest win. That's setting your cow up for lactation. After that, it's maintaining a good, well-balanced lactating diet, keep that cow going. A revised herd health plan, and then lastly, fertility. That's the outcome of your dry cow diet and lactating diet, but also keeping on top of with good record keeping and regular scanning. If I was to summarise it, there's a lot of things there, but basically, to manage that high yielding cow, that metabolic athlete, it's the consistent attention to detail on absolutely everything all the time.